On September 25th, 1982, at exactly 11:30 p.m., in the very heart of Manhattan, in the labyrinth of corridors at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, the air was saturated not with the usual scent of hairspray and expensive perfume, but with something sour, heavy, and sticky, the smell of pure, undiluted disgust. You think you know what the backstage of the legendary Saturday Night Live looks like? You imagine an endless party, laughter, the clinking of glasses, and friendly hugs between stars. But on that night, when the band Queen was preparing for their last broadcast on American television, the atmosphere in the dressing room resembled not a celebration, but the wait for an execution. Freddie Mercury stood before the mirror, surrounded by bright lights that ruthlessly highlighted every pore on his face, but he didn't see his reflection. He saw the technical staff whispering behind his back in the dim doorway, and although he couldn't make out the words, the intonation was unmistakable. It wasn't a whisper of admiration, it was a whisper of revulsion. At that moment, 5 minutes before going live, to all of America, Freddie realized a terrible truth that hit him harder than any bass riff. His career in the States was over. Just yesterday he was a god filling stadiums, and today he had become a leper invited on air only for the sake of scandal. Why? He hadn't killed anyone, hadn't robbed a bank, hadn't betrayed his country. He had committed a crime that in testosterone-fueled early 80s America was punishable by the supreme measure of social ostracism. He stopped pretending to be normal. You look at his famous mustache and see just a style, but for that time, it was a red rag thrown in the face of a raging bull. It was a code, a signal, the uniform of San Francisco gay clubs, which he brazenly wore on national television. But you don't know the most important part. You see a confident artist warming up his vocal cords, producing his famous scales that make windows rattle. But no one in the studio, not a single cameraman, not a single producer, not even Brian May, standing in the next room, guessed what was burning Freddie through the fabric of his tight leather pants. In the right pocket of his jacket lay a letter received that morning at the hotel reception. It wasn't a love letter, nor did it contain a request for an autograph. Inside the envelope, there weren't even words. There lay a single object that became the dagger capable of severing the artery of his self-control at any second. It was a cheap, disposable razor blade, rusted at the edges, sharp as a scalpel. An anonymous well-wisher had sent it with a silent but crystal-clear message: shave it off or cut yourself open. Imagine feeling the cold of that steel through the thin lining of your pocket. Every time Freddie took a breath, he felt this small metal rectangle reminding him, you are hated here. They want to destroy you. They want to erase you. You think he was scared. You think he wanted to throw that blade into the trash can and forget about it like a bad dream? And this is where the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, flipping your perception of victim and predator. Anyone else in his place would have broken, called security, canceled the performance citing a sore throat, because the fear of physical violence is the strongest instinct. But Freddie did something that defies the logic of a normal person. He shoved his hand into his pocket. His fingers found the cold metal. He squeezed the blade so hard it slightly cut the skin on the pad of his thumb, and that drop of blood welling up in the darkness of his pocket became not a signal for retreat, but fuel. He realized this blade wasn't meant to shave off a mustache. It was meant to castrate his soul. They wanted him to walk onto that stage, scared, clean-shaven, comfortable, understandable to housewives in Ohio. They wanted to see a puppet. But the second the broadcast director began the countdown, 10 seconds to air, Freddie pulled his hand out of his pocket, leaving the blade inside as a talisman of hatred. He looked in the mirror and smiled that predatory smile that made conservatives clench their jaws. He decided not just to go on stage, he decided to go out there to declare war. You think this was an act of insane bravery? No, it was an act of despair from a man cornered. He knew that after this broadcast, radio stations would boycott him, album sales would plummet into the abyss, and garbage would be thrown at him at concerts. But he also knew that if he bent now, if he removed this provocative element of his image, he would cease to be Freddie Mercury and become just Farrokh Bulsara, the boy who spent his whole life trying to please others. The dressing room door swung open with a bang. An assistant with a headset waved his hand. Time. Freddie stepped into the corridor. His heart beat to the rhythm of under pressure, but outwardly, he was an icy cliff. He walked down the corridor past those very technicians who averted their eyes, and instead of lowering his head, he squared his shoulders so wide it seemed he occupied the entire space. He walked toward his execution, live on air, clutching in his pocket the razor sent by an enemy, turning it into a symbol of his unbreakability. At that moment, September 25th, 1982, America was preparing to see a show, but it didn't even suspect it would witness the birth of a new, dark, and dangerous legend that would force homophobes to sing his anthems without even realizing whom they were singing along with. The curtain was rising, and there was no turning back. When the red tally light in the Saturday Night Live studio finally went out, and the final chords of Under Pressure dissolved into polite but frighteningly thin applause, Freddie Mercury didn't just walk backstage. He stepped into a new era where the air was poisoned by an invisible venom. You think the scariest thing happened on stage? You are mistaken. The real nightmare began the next morning when the porter at the Helmsley Palace Hotel, stone-faced, placed a stack of fresh newspapers before him. The headlines didn't scream about music. They didn't discuss vocal range or Brian May's guitar solos. They discussed only one thing: how the king of rock dared to look as if he had just walked out of The Saint, an underground bar in San Francisco. Let's be honest, early 80s America was not a time for nuance. It was the era of steroid heroes, a time when Rambo and the Terminator dictated standards of masculinity, and Reagan declared a crusade for traditional values. Into this world, soaked in testosterone and the smell of gunpowder, Freddie entered not with apologies, but with a mustache. You look at old photos and see just a change of image, but you miss that very cipher which only a few read, but millions hated. That mustache, that short haircut, those tight white tank tops, it wasn't just a style, it was a uniform. It was the so-called Castro clone look, a visual code of the gay subculture of that time, a friend or foe signal that Freddie, with the audacity of a suicidal man, broadcast on the country's main screens. And here begins the first loop of tension. Why did he do it? Why did a man whose fortune depended on record sales in the U.S. Bible Belt decide to tease the tiger by sticking his head in its mouth? Any PR manager would have told him, shave it off immediately, put on a denim jacket, pretend to be one of the guys. But Freddie didn't just ignore advice, he doubled down. You think he didn't understand the consequences? He saw radio stations in the Midwest, which just yesterday played We Will Rock You every half hour, suddenly put Queen on blacklists. He saw sales of the Hot Space album plummet into the abyss like a stone thrown down a well. But instead of retreating, he was preparing his grandest and most dangerous stunt. The world sees the music video for I Want to Break Free. In the UK, viewers laugh until their sides hurt, understanding the reference to the popular soap opera Coronation Street, where men dress as women for comic effect. But across the Atlantic, in America, something resembling a collective nervous breakdown occurs. When MTV bosses saw Freddie in a pink top, with fake breasts, a wig, and that mustache, vacuuming a carpet, they didn't see a joke. They saw a threat to national security. The video was banned, simply erased from the airwaves. The band was accused of promoting cross-dressing, debauchery, and everything conservative fathers feared. You probably think Freddie was crushed, that he tore his hair out, realizing he had single-handedly destroyed the planet's largest music market? This is where the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, flipping your understanding of the situation. While Brian May clutched his head in horror-counting losses, and Roger Taylor broke drumsticks in fury, cursing American hypocrisy, Freddie enjoyed it. Yes, you heard right. In this chaos, in this stream of hatred, he found a perverse satisfaction. Why? Because the video ban and radio station boycott confirmed his main guess. They fear not his orientation, they fear his freedom. And then he makes a genius move, comparable to deploying a Trojan horse. You think I Want to Break Free is a song about wanting to leave an annoying girlfriend? Listen to the lyrics again. Listen to the intonation with which he sings, God knows, I want to break free. It's not a pop song. It's a manifesto. It's the scream of a man locked in a closet, breaking the doors down from the inside. The sweetest irony, which should give you goosebumps, is that he forced his enemies to sing this anthem. Imagine the scene. A tough trucker from Alabama, who hates those perverts, driving down the highway, listening to a cassette because the radio won't play the song, and singing at the top of his lungs, I want to break free. He thinks he's singing about his hard job or mortgage, but in reality, he is singing a gay liberation anthem written by a man he despises. Freddie hacked America's cultural code. He made homophobes accomplices to his rebellion without them even suspecting it. But don't rush to rejoice at this intellectual victory, because every coin has a flip side soaked in blood. While Freddie played this cat and mouse game with public opinion, tension inside the band reached a boiling point. You think Queen was a unified monolith? In those days, the band's dressing room resembled a war zone. The other members, family men, heterosexuals, found themselves hostages of the war Freddie had declared. They were losing millions. Their tours were being canceled. They were booed. Brian May would later admit that in that period they were closer to breaking up than ever. Ask yourself, what is it like to go on stage knowing that the person standing next to you at the mic is a walking target? What is it like to realize that your music no longer matters because everyone is interested only in who your vocalist sleeps with? Freddie felt this guilt. He saw John Deacon's reproachful looks. He felt the air thicken in the studio, but he couldn't stop. It was no longer just stubbornness. It was a mission. He decided that if America wouldn't accept him as he was, then America didn't deserve Queen. And so, when it seemed the bottom had been reached, when the U.S. tour was officially canceled and the band was effectively banished from the continent, Freddie makes a statement that sounds like a sentence upon himself. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't shave the mustache. In an interview, he speaks with that haughty, regal intonation. I don't care what they think. I will be who I want to be, even if I have to sing to empty halls. But the halls weren't empty. They were full of hate. And this hate materialized not in newspaper articles, but in physical objects that began appearing in the hands of the audience at subsequent concerts. You think the worst is over? You think losing the market is the finale? No. It was only the prelude, because words can hurt, but they cannot draw blood. And what the fans were preparing for him in the next stage was designed to do exactly that. Turn metaphorical pain into physical pain, and Freddie, standing on the edge of this precipice, didn't even suspect that his Trojan horse would soon return to him, packed with real iron. The events that unfolded on the stage of the Milton Keynes Bowl in June 1982 were supposed to be the triumphant conclusion of the tour, but the air above the 60,000-strong crowd was charged not with celebration, but with the electricity of an approaching storm, and anyone standing backstage that evening felt the metallic taste of danger on their tongue. You watch the video of that concert and see a sea of raised hands, hear the roar of the crowd, but the camera doesn't convey what was happening in the front rows, where fan love mixed with aggression, fueled by months of press harassment. Freddie Mercury walked onto the stage not just as an artist. He walked out like a gladiator into an arena where half the audience craved blood, and he knew the stakes were higher than ever, for this was the finale of the tour, supporting that scandalous album, Hot Space, which had split his audience in half. You think the scariest thing for a singer is losing their voice? No. The scariest thing is losing control of the crowd, which turns into a single unpredictable organism. And precisely at the moment the band paused between songs, this organism showed its teeth. From the darkness of the pit, cutting through the spotlight beams, an object flew onto the stage. It wasn't the usual bouquet of flowers, not a stuffed toy, nor even women's lingerie usually thrown at Freddie. The object fell with a dull, ominous thud right at the vocalist's feet, glinting in the stage lights with a cold, predatory light. The music instantly died, as if someone had cut the power cable, and in that sudden, deafening silence, Freddie lowered his gaze. What was it? You expect to see a stone or a bottle. Reality turned out to be far more symbolic and cruel. It was a pack of razor blades, exactly like the one that lay in his pocket in New York. Only now the threat ceased to be anonymous and hidden in an envelope. It materialized. It was thrown in his face in front of 60,000 witnesses. The message was crystal clear. Shave it. Become normal. Or cut yourself. That very visual silence we spoke of ensued. A moment of absolute vacuum where time stretches to infinity, and one can only hear the powerful amplifier tubes humming and blood pounding in the temples. Brian May froze with his guitar. Roger Taylor half rose from behind the drums, ready to rush to help. But no one dared move, because the center of this universe right now was only one man. All eyes were fixed on Freddie. What would he do? Walk off stage, ruining the concert and giving haters a reason to call him hysterical? Order security to remove the attacker? Or maybe he would break and show the fear that had haunted him for months. The audience in the front rows held their breath, expecting an explosion of anger. For any man whose masculinity and identity are so publicly insulted must respond blow for blow. But this is where the psychological flip happens. The Santa Barbara effect that breaks the script of violence. Freddie slowly leaned down. He didn't recoil in horror. He looked at the scattered blades with the air of a bored aristocrat who discovered a stain on the tablecloth. And then he raised his head and looked directly into the part of the crowd from where the gift had flown. Are you looking for rage in his eyes? Are you looking for tears? You will find nothing there but icy, frightening calm and a slight, barely noticeable smile that was sharper than any razor. In that second, he made a decision that would forever enter rock and roll history as an example of supreme psychological aikido. Instead of screaming, instead of lecturing on tolerance, he turned on his heels and walked to the piano. He sat at the instrument with such grace as if he were in his own living room, not under the crosshairs of hatred, and his fingers struck the keys. The intro he began to play wasn't aggressive rock. These were the opening chords of Somebody to Love. Do you understand the monstrous irony and greatness of this moment? A man just had blades thrown at him, demanding he change, demanding he destroy his identity, and in response, he begins to sing a gospel prayer about finding love. Can anybody find me somebody to love? This question sounded not like a line from a song, but as a challenge to every one of those 60,000 people. Freddie's voice that evening sounded not just powerful, it held a primal superhuman strength. He sang with such passion, with such anguish, that it seemed his vocal cords would burst from the tension. He turned this song into a weapon of mass destruction. He forced the very people who 5 minutes ago whistled and threw garbage to sing along with him. It was pure magic. He took the energy of hatred and transformed it into a choir. Imagine this picture. Tough guys in denim jackets who came to listen to hard rock and laugh at the fag suddenly find themselves standing with wet eyes, screaming at the top of their lungs, "Lord, what you're doing to me!" Freddie manipulated their emotions like a puppeteer. He made them feel his pain, his loneliness, his desperate thirst to be accepted. And against this sincerity, they had no defense. The blades remained lying on the stage, forgotten and useless, because metal cannot wound someone who just bared his soul and proved invulnerable. In that moment, Freddie Mercury ceased to be just a singer. He became a preacher who converted pagans to his faith without uttering a single sermon. He proved that if you remain true to yourself, even under a hail of razors, the world will sooner or later bend to you. When the last notes of the song faded, there was no longer a division into fans and haters in the stadium. There was only a unified, deafening roar of delight that washed away all doubts. Freddie stood up from the piano, soaked in sweat, and blew a kiss to the hall, that very Legends action gesture that finally finished off the enemies. He didn't defeat them with force. He defeated them with magnanimity, showing that his love for music was stronger than their hatred for his nature. But he knew this victory was merely a truce, and the main battle for his legacy was still ahead. On July 13, 1985, as the sun above Wembley Stadium melted the asphalt and the air trembled with the screams of 72,000 people, Freddie Mercury's story should have, by the logic of all music critics of the time, ended in the quiet fading of a former star. But this is where the grandiose plot twist occurs that forces us to rethink everything we knew about the nature of victory. You probably think Queen arrived at Live Aid as headliners, as kings awaited with a red carpet? Throw that illusion out of your head. Reality was much crueler. By 1985, the band was considered dinosaurs. Their latest albums had failed in America. They were torn by internal conflicts, and Freddie himself, exhausted by scandals and boycotts, was in such a state that doctors advised him not to sing. Festival organizer Bob Geldof included them on the list almost out of pity, like old furniture one regrets throwing away, but which no longer fits the new wave interior. Do you smell that scent of defeat? It hung in Queen's dressing room before they went on. They knew America hated them. They knew they had only 20 minutes to prove to the world they were still alive. And so, at 6:41 p.m., Freddie runs out onto the stage. Note how he looks. Remember that dagger from the first part of our story, that rusty razor blade in his pocket in New York, and that pack of blades thrown in his face at Milton Keynes? Fans, the press, the industry, they all demanded one thing from him. Take this razor, shave the mustache, destroy your identity, become normal. And here he stands before a billion-strong TV audience. What do you see on his face? A mustache. That thick, black, provocative mustache that became the symbol of his depravity. He didn't shave it. He didn't put on a modest suit. He came out in a tight white tank top and jeans, maximally emphasizing that clone image from San Francisco gay clubs for which he had been crucified for the last 3 years. At this moment, the intellectual orgasm of our entire story triggers. The blade meant to castrate him, he used quite differently. He didn't cut his skin or shave his hair with it. He used the sharpness of his truth to cut through the airwaves. He came out as he was and forced 1.9 billion people to watch him without blinking. But the real magic, which should give you goosebumps, began not with the first note of Bohemian Rhapsody. It began the moment he forced the entire stadium, the entire world, including those rednecks in Alabama burning his records, to do what he wanted. Remember his famous I.O.? It wasn't just a vocal warm-up, it was training. He took 70,000 people and turned them into his personal instrument. He controlled them like a conductor controls an orchestra, and they obeyed him with religious ecstasy. Where was their homophobia at that moment? Where was their hatred? It dissolved, vanished, burned by the napalm of his charisma. He proved that talent has no gender, no orientation. It has only one characteristic: absolute power. And here we approach the sweetest, most sophisticated moment of his revenge, which most people miss because it is hidden in plain sight, the finale of the performance. We are the champions. You've heard this song 1,000 times. It plays at every football match, every hockey final. Drunken fans sing it in bars, hugging and banging mugs on the table. It is an anthem of masculinity, an anthem of winners, an anthem of strength. But let's apply the Santa Barbara effect and flip the meaning of this song, now knowing the context of Freddie's life. Listen to the lyrics. Truly listen. I've had my share of sand kicked in my face. I've paid my dues time after time. What is this song about? Sports? Scored goals? No. It is the ballad of an outcast. It is the confession of a man who was bullied, beaten, thrown blades and garbage at, but who stood tall. It is a gay community anthem disguised as stadium rock. Freddie Mercury committed the greatest cultural sabotage in history. He wrote a song about minority survival in an aggressive environment and made it the majority's main song. Imagine this breathtaking picture: a stern family father who forbids his son to wear pink and hates those people, stands at the stadium or in front of the TV, and with tears in his eyes sings, "We are the champions." He thinks he is singing about himself, but in reality, he is singing about Freddie. He is singing about that guy in the leather cap he despised. Freddie forced his enemies not just to accept him, he forced them to worship him, using his words as their own. The razor blade, meant to destroy him, ultimately became the tool with which he carved his name on humanity's heart. When he walked off the Wembley stage, wet, out of breath, with a towel around his neck, he knew he had won. Not because he sold more records, but because he hacked the code. He embedded his DNA into the culture so deeply it can no longer be extracted. America was lost as a market, but America was conquered as a cultural space. Years later, when he is gone, this moment at Live Aid will be rewatched millions of times, and every view will be a small nail in the coffin of intolerance. But the most important legacy of this day lies not in music. It is in those thousands of little people, outsider teenagers, sitting in front of TVs in their stuffy rooms, feeling like mistakes of nature. They looked at this man controlling the universe without hiding his essence, and a life-saving thought was born in their heads. If he could make the world love him despite everything, if he didn't break under a hail of blades, then I can too. Freddie didn't just entertain the crowd, he gave permission to be different. He showed that otherness is not a curse, it is a superpower. If you have the courage not to shave off your metaphorical mustache. And this victory was louder than any sound ever emitted by speakers at Wembley. The music cuts off on the highest, most piercing note, the screen goes dark, and in this sudden, deafening silence that follows the roar of Wembley Stadium, you are left alone with a close-up of Freddie's eyes. Eyes that hold no fear, but a deep, age-old fatigue of a man who won a war no one even suspected existed. You think the story ended with a happy ending? That after Live Aid, the world fell at his feet and forgave him everything? This is the most dangerous illusion Hollywood sold us. Turn off the sentimentality and look truth in the face. The war didn't end. It just moved into a guerrilla phase. And right now, when you are ready to put a period, the plot takes its last, cruelest, and most paradoxical turn, forcing you to rethink every word said before. Let's return to that dagger, the rusty razor blade in his pocket in New York, and the pack of blades thrown in his face at Milton Keynes. Fans demanded he use it to destroy his otherness, to cut away everything that made him Freddie. You admire that he didn't succumb, that he kept the mustache and went on stage as a clone, but have you thought about the price of this stubbornness? The cruelest irony of fate is that, having won the battle for the stage, he lost the battle for the right to be just a human being. Society signed a tacit, devilish contract with him. We will sing your songs, we will carry you on our hands, but only as long as you remain silent about who you really are. Do you understand the horror of this deal? He was allowed to be a gay icon, but forbidden to be a gay person. He was allowed to hint, play, tease, but not speak directly. And here arises a question that should burn your conscience. Was he free in his triumph, or was it a golden cage with bars made of platinum records? Look at what is happening today, decades after his death. This is that intellectual orgasm, the final convergence of all plot lines into a single point that blows the mind. Walk into any sports bar in Texas, any pub in Liverpool, any stadium in Moscow. What will you see? You will see stern men soaked in testosterone, men who perhaps use homophobic jokes in daily life, men who consider themselves the standard of traditional masculinity. And what are they doing? They are hugging, raising mugs, and with tears in their eyes singing, "We are the champions." They are singing an anthem written by a man they wanted to destroy in the 80s. They are singing words about having sand kicked in my face, not understanding that in this song, we is not a football team, but those very outcasts they despised. Freddie Mercury committed the greatest cultural sabotage in human history. He didn't just survive, he embedded his DNA into his enemy's circulatory system. He became a virus that cannot be cured because the carrier loves its symptoms. The razor blade designed to castrate him. He smelted into a key that unlocked the hearts of billions, even if those hearts remained closed to tolerance. This is the highest level of revenge, forcing your executioners to worship their victim without even realizing it. But this coin has a dark reverse side, about which silence is kept on fan forums. While you applaud his genius Trojan horse strategy, behind your back stand activists of the 80s and 90s, people dying in hospices from AIDS, abandoned by the state and society. They look at Freddie not as a hero, but as a traitor. Ask yourself an uncomfortable question. If the most famous person on the planet had come out and told the truth, not a day before death, but years earlier, how many lives could that have saved? How many stigmas would have been destroyed if he had used his microphone not only for songs, but for a political statement? Do you feel this dissonance? You want to defend him, say he was a musician, not a politician, that he owed nothing to anyone. But the worm of doubt has already begun its work. His silence about the illness, his refusal to become the face of the fight against the epidemic while alive, was this an act of protecting his art? A desire to remain in people's memory as a god, not a patient? Or was it fear? That primal fear of losing the crowd's love, which he had won with such difficulty at Live Aid? That fear of the razor blade, which could boomerang back and slit not a metaphorical, but the real throat of his career. We are used to seeing him as a rebel who broke rules, but perhaps in the most important question of his life, he never managed to break the last rule, the rule of silence. He left undefeated on stage, but in the personal battle against prejudice, he chose the tactics of a partisan, not a general. He left us music that unites the world, but he took to the grave the truth that could have changed this world even faster. And now that you see the full picture, from trembling hands in a New York dressing room to the majestic monument in Montreux, to which gays, straights, right-wingers, and left-wingers bring flowers, I place before you the scales of history. On one side, a genius strategist who hacked the system's code, forced homophobes to sing his anthems, and proved talent is above any labels. On the other side, a hostage of his own image, a man so afraid of losing his crown, he preferred to remain silent when his voice was needed by millions of dying people. Who is he to you in the final analysis? A hero who outplayed hatred by making it his fuel, or a victim who never fully freed himself from the fear of that very blade? Was his path of hidden rebellion the only possible one in that cruel time, or was it an excuse for comfortable silence? This is not just a question about the past. It is a question of how we evaluate courage today. Go down to the comments. I don't want to see a banal legend. I want to see your pain and your truth. Strategist or victim, write one word and let the battle begin, unequaled even at Wembley Stadium.